Gotcha.
So let's go ahead and get started. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli bi'izni ilma. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and send peace and blessings upon our final messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Welcome back everyone to the story night, Tuesday night story night, in which we've been going through a series of talking about the story of Musa AS as it exists in the Quran and trying to understand why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shares certain details and how it's really a story that is timeless and is being retold and relived in every single kind of generation, every single individual. And that's one of the reasons it's found as one of the stories of the Quran. We've been going through the story of Musa AS, of course, as it's found in Surah Al-Qasas so far. And we got up to his kind of age in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said he had matured. He had an amazing start to his life. He was a child who wasn't necessarily supposed to live. Doesn't that sound familiar? A child who wasn't supposed to live, and then suddenly he does live, and he's the reason why a tyrant gets taken down. Okay. Anyway, the boy that lived is Musa AS story. For those of you that didn't get it over the top, let's talk about Harry Potter. So it's and then it went on to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going out of his way of describing how amazing his mother was, how intelligent his sister was. There was so much to that storytelling of you were supposed to be amazed by it. You were supposed to be humanly touched by it. The plea of this mother kind of sending her only child, or not her only child, but her baby boy, newborn child, down a river. There's supposed to be some humor in it. You laugh when you see how intelligent his sister is. And then there's supposed to be this idea of one person's problem is another person's solution. Because the mother, the wife of Pharaoh actually picks up Musa AS, and she finally has some respite from the tyranny of Pharaoh by raising this baby. So again, it's so complex in terms of, think of all the emotional kind of roller coasters that each of these people are going through. And then last week we got to the story where Musa AS, as he attained maturity, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted him wisdom and granted him knowledge, something we don't typically see happening with a spoiled brat who's raised in a palace. Or whatever, however many palaces exist in the societies of today. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him that and then demonstrates actually what someone with wisdom and knowledge does when they make a mistake. And I think it's a beautiful part of last week that I didn't necessarily touch on, is someone with power, someone with knowledge and wisdom. This was a case study of what they're supposed to do. It's not that they don't make mistakes. What do they do right after their mistakes? They don't let them follow them. They immediately ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for repentance, and they immediately try to rectify themselves to deal with the consequences. Now I'm going to share my screen. Here we are. Can everyone see that?
Yep, we can see that.
Yeah, I can see it.
Awesome. And I'm back to my home computer today, so I actually feel comfortable doing this. Alhamdulillah. One thing I forgot is to make a couple of you admins. Do that really quickly. Okay. So now we get into the story as it's found today. Last time we left off with, then a man came rushing from the farthest part of the city. وَجَاءَ رَجُلٌ مِّنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ يَسْعَى قَالَ يَا مُوسَى. When he comes from the farthest end of the city, one of the ways I personally see it is, yes, maybe he lived at the outskirts of the city, but I don't think that's what's really being described here. He lived in the other part of town. I don't think that's what's being described. When you say someone is from the other side of the city, I think it means he's not representative of a typical city person. If a city is known for corruption, a city is known for civil rights abuses, the city is known for insert whatever negative quality. When you say this person happens to live there, but he's not like that, it's a person who's not a part of the problem. They're someone who's just kind of there. That's what I see when Allah says that min aqsal madinati, from the far part of town, he rushes over to Musa AS. Another reason I say that, this is going to get into a bigger discussion, but I think you guys are mashallah capable of handling it. Allah will use two words to describe city in the Quran. Actually, three if we want to be accurate. There'll be balad, which is usually translated now in Arabic as country. There will be qarya, which is typically now translated as a small city, and Medina, which is typically translated as a slightly bigger city. In the Quranic narrative, it didn't actually translate to the size of a city. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in Mecca, for example, as Hada baladin amin. This is a city that is protected, right? Or by the sacred city. And then Ashab al-Qariyati is what's actually described as the people who in Surah al-Yasin. And then in this case, it's Aqsa al-Madinati. Rajulun min Aqsa al-Madina. It's from a Medina. So one of the ways that we really appreciate that is a Medina is typically used to describe a city in which you're not trying to talk about its diversity, you're trying to talk about a quality that makes them all close together. So we have certain ways of doing this where we'll say something along the lines of Northeastern people, or like Southern hospitality, or the opposite, Southern racism. Right? We're using a geographic location in order to put together an entire characteristic of a certain place. That would be the idea of using Medina. In this case, وَقَالَ رَجُلٌ مِّنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ. A man came from the furthest aspect of the city, so he is not representative of that. And that I think there's such benefits even in this just one verse, that just because someone is from some place doesn't mean that they are responsible for all of the evil that goes on there. And I think this is something we need to really appreciate, because we're quick to cast judgment that like all people of a certain profession are bad. We can dismiss everything about someone because they were born somewhere. That's not true. There could be a person who came from literally, it seems like he also has intel about what Pharaoh has ordered, meaning he's probably even a part of the military police of Egypt. But he says, قَالَ يَا مُوسَى إِنَّ الْمَلَأَ يَأْتَمِرُونَ بِكَ لِيَقْتُلُوكَ. So he says, the chiefs have conspired, the leadership has spoken, and they've all conspired that they want to kill you. فَخْرُجْ إِنِّي لَكَ مِنَ النَّاصِحِينَ. And you should really leave right now, because I really want good for you. I'm really here to give you sincere advice. So this almost sounds like he was in the boardroom when the decision was made, which would mean that he has citizenship, quote unquote, in this elite class of military people who want him gone. And remember, we already established that Musa AS to the military police, he's public enemy number one, because he represents their biggest failure. That when the order to kill was given, they allowed a baby to infiltrate the triangle house. I don't know if that's what they called the pyramids back then, but I would assume it's something like that. He infiltrated the pyramid office. Okay, I'm done. Instead of the Oval Office. Anyway, it's this idea that he did that, and he was constantly a slap in their face that they had failed. So that's why they were always out to get him. And finally, when they had a reason to get him, they're like, we're not waiting to get this passed by Pharaoh. It's shoot to kill. It's take him in dead or alive. Seems to be the situation. And this man is saying, I'm really trying to advise you. Please do this. I see another lesson coming from this is take advice from anyone who's sincerely giving you advice. There are going to be people in our lives who give us advice who would normally not give us advice. But someone who has wisdom and knowledge, they take the advice. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the next ayah says, فَخَرَجَ مِنْهَا خَائِفًا. And he led the city in a state of fear. يَتَرَقَّبُ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that he left kind of with fear and caution. He was going a little bit at a time. So like from one place to the next, he was going basically being incognito once again. And then he again calls out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قَالَ رَبِّي نَجِّنِي مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. Oh Allah, free me or deliver me from a wrong-doing people. He could be talking about, of course, the Egyptians, because no trial whatsoever, just go straight to kind of the shoot-to-kill order. Or he could be even actually talking about himself in this case, that I've been around these people that caused me to make such an error of, remember, he killed someone just a little bit ago. So Musa is young man who's distraught, young man who's kind of facing the consequences of what just happened, and also the consequences of what the police have put the order out for him. So he runs away. I'm going to stop here. I want to hear some reflections from all of you. We just went over ayah 20 and 21. What do you guys think?
I noticed something cool, like going back to like the first day of class when we talked about this one ayah where Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala described not everyone in the council to be bad, like in the council of like Pharaoh to be bad. He didn't put everyone in the bad category. Like, you know, he could have just specifically said, "Oh, Pharaoh's the bad guy." I'm sorry, Pharaoh's the bad guy, and sorry, I'm like blanking out. But like just saying like, you know, he didn't put everyone in, like he Loki like kind of cut people a slack,
Yeah.
you know. So and this like proves it too. Someone who is elite came up to, not elite, like, you know, in the citizenship level, came up to Musa and helped them out.
Yeah. I think it's a beautiful point. We don't paint with broad brushes. There are people in the worst organizations doing a lot of good. But then the same thing applies the other way around. There are people in awesome organizations who are useless, who are actually causing a bunch of problems. So it's not just guilt by association in our tradition. And I think a lot of us have experienced that. There's like in groups and out groups, and your narrative comes down to not your individual characteristics, but who you know or who you hang out with. And though there's truth to that, because there's so much in our tradition that talks about like, hey, the company that you keep has an effect on you, does not mean though that they are incapable of good. This is a man who, by everything we've been given of the story so far, it's because of him that Musa a.s. was able to survive, right? Because Musa a.s. has been saved from certain death a couple of times now. This is another time, and this time it's at the hands of who? One of the military police of Egypt. Anyone else?
Two things. One, just to boost the point, I think what you just talked about in terms of Prophet Musa alayhi salam, we can see that, you know, when he punched the man, that could be a reflection of his environment affecting him. But the fact that he immediately understood that what he did was wrong is a reflection of his own character. But secondly, I had a question. So I was going back to like the different ayahs in Surah Qasas, and how did we exactly come to this point again? There's such a big jump between ayah 14 and 15, where it's just like, oh yeah, you know, like the Wetner situation is happening, and then all of a sudden he just enters the city unannounced.
Yeah. So I just scrolled up to ayah 13, and it was literally like, hey, we returned him to his mother so his heart could be at ease. And then وَلَمَّا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ. And then finally, when he reached full age of maturity and strength. Many people see this as like being in his 20s. So by some interpretations, it's actually when Musa reaches the age of 33, is generally what's being understood here. I make the argument that Allah introduced all of the major characters in Musa's life. You have him in being influenced by his foster mother, the wife of Pharaoh. So he's got nobility. He's got his actual mother. He's got his super intelligent sister. And he's already understood how each of them navigates life differently. Someone who has that diverse of mentorship, they will grow up to be wise and knowledgeable. A lot of details aren't given in the Quran, but in my opinion, the relevant details were provided. So that's why there's such a jump. We suddenly go from like, okay, so baby Musa and then like 30-year-old Musa.
Yeah, and then from there, how do we get from that point to him entering the city unannounced? What's he going there just?
That represents what he would do often. Musa, even though he was even the ayah number 15 was, even though he's a prince of Egypt and he's being raised this way, he doesn't always present himself as being the prince of Egypt. Because normally when a prince goes somewhere, there's like an entourage, there's like an announcement, there's a guy who comes with a trumpet, the prince is here, right? Or something like that. That's not Musa alayhi salam. That he's not about that life. And that's introduced through the little detail of he entered a city unnoticed by its people. When he walked to a place, he walked with humility. He wanted to see what the life on the ground was that characterizes him already.
Oh, so one day when he was on one of these casual visits of his, one of the guys approaches him and tells him that, hey, you know, this is happening. Oh, but then how did that man recognize him?
He didn't. That man just saw a big looking dude. And he's like, help me.
No, I'm talking about the part afterwards where he was like, "Oh, they're conspiring to kill you."
Oh, he must still have friends. Like I'm talking the average
Oh,
person. The average person doesn't know who Musa alayhi salam is. So the average Hebrew person and the average police guard can't recognize him, right? But someone in nobility, of course, knows one of the princes of Egypt.
oh, that makes sense. Okay, jazakallah khair.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I appreciate you asking the questions. And what's one of that's one of the things I love about the details that are found in the Quran is no detail is given without it being like a huge characteristic part of adding some detail into Musa alayhi salam's life that helps you really understand who he was. Anyone else? Any questions until and as we continue?
I have like small connection that I just made. I know you like to refer to a lot of like, movies that we see to like the Quran and everything, some of the Quran scenes. It just like last week I wasn't here, but like you mentioned about the part where he would go out and like, just walk around like dressed as a normal person. I'm assuming he would just go around to help people out. And it just reminds me of like the amount of times I've seen in Bollywood movies and sometimes in Hollywood movies how this one big leader would dress up as like a normal person, go around the cities and help out everyone.
Yeah.
And this scene was just captured in the Quran so many years ago. Even with the Sahabas, you can see that characteristics of like going into the field, not field up, going into the amongst the people and helping the people out. That just goes to show like their noble characteristic and what it means to be like a person of wisdom and knowledge and like respect and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't even make this connection, but I now that you said it, I have to say it. We oftentimes think in our society today that the person with the most degrees or the person with the most followers on YouTube or whatever, like they're the most knowledgeable person. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says we gave him knowledge and wisdom, yet when he walked down the street, no one knew who he was. And we can make the argument it's the people didn't recognize him, or I actually make the argument the other way. He never did anything to gain notoriety. That's not what he used his knowledge and wisdom to do. So Shobhan, that's a very, very beautiful point. Now I'm going to continue. Then Musa Islam again, he's in fear, he's running away. He keeps calling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help. I want you to also characterize him. He keeps calling Allah for help. Because, and you ask the question, where did he get Allah? Where does he know Allah from? His mother is a believer. His foster mother is a believer. Both of them are amazing, amazing female characters in the Quran. So he's obviously got some degree of this. It's not like Musa Islam didn't know who Allah was. He was calling on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even in this time. He wasn't yet a prophet in the sense that he has received revelation yet. Doesn't mean that he didn't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about the conversation he has with Allah. What does prophethood mean? Was it them finally like achieving the status of like, now I understand there's only one God? Like, was that prophethood? Is that prophethood? Or did that already exist, but it gets specified and it gets kind of fine-tuned when revelation comes down? We'll get to that conversation in a little bit. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, ولما توجه تلقاء مدين قال عسى ربي أن يهديني سواء السبيل. As he made his way towards Midian, no detail given as to how he chose Midian as a destination. He says, I trust that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide me to a sawa as-sabil, to a somehow put together or connected, sawa is the connected path, that Allah will connect me or plop me onto the point that I need to go. Because why? He's super scared. He doesn't know where to go. I would assume he has not really traveled all that much. He's done as much as Allah only captured what? That he traveled around the city. He traveled around the areas where there's civilization. But Madian, as we're going to come to find out, and we know from other stories in the Quran, is not actually a very populated place. And Musa is trying to make his way towards it, towards this area in which maybe he can be saved is one thing, because the police are out to get him, and where he can maybe reform himself, because he's having as much as a practical crisis as an existential crisis. because there's the practical crisis of the police are out to kill me. And there's also this existential crisis that he's going through, that he's in a state of fear. He's in a state of, I don't want to live like that anymore. Even if this is me conjecturing here, but I would assume even if it was done by accident, killing someone like that scarred Musa alayhi salam. He's like, why would I want to go back to a society or a situation in which that occurred? The biblical retelling of this story, there's one detail that's in the biblical version that's not in the Quranic version. And generally how we appreciate biblical stories is if they contradict the Quran, we say that they probably came from some other source. If they don't, there might be some level of truth to them. But in the biblical retelling of the story, Musa alayhi salam goes to Fir'aun or Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, you don't need to leave. I can make it as if nothing happened. I'll expunge you of your sin. And Musa alayhi salam still chooses, no, but I did this, I need to leave. And it's a self-exile. Quranic perspective doesn't seem to mention that detail. So Allahu alam whether it happened or not. But I don't think it's wrong to say that there's both an internal drive to leave and a practical necessity to leave. Both are actually synced. And he says, yeah, Allah, just guide me. I'm leaving. I'm escaping my sin. I'm escaping another form of certain death. And I'm escaping kind of the society that led me to do such a heinous act, even though it was by accident. Any questions there? I think a reflection for us is this is a dua that maybe all of us should make. Not maybe, all of us should definitely make. قال عسى ربي أن يهديني سواء السبيل. I trust that my Lord will guide me to the right way, especially in times in which we feel lost or we're not necessarily proud of what we just did. Go ahead. And we're in a difficult situation. I'm putting my trust that maybe asa, maybe Allah is actually guiding me through. And I have full trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah will be guiding me. In the right way. And it's also kind of interesting because Asa, Rabbi, perhaps Allah, normally we don't make conditional statements with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We say something like, yeah, Allah guided me. But he has like a casual way even of speaking about to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That shows his closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how often he would talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about something. It's kind of like this idea, maybe this was best for me. He's having this internal dialogue at constant times. And Allah loved that so much that we got how many ayat about his teens, his adolescence, his teens, his 20s. Oh no. Okay. How many ayat about that? None. And we get one ayah about a passing thought that he had in his head. Or maybe he just said once in his speech. So kind of beautiful to think about there. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, وَلَمَّا, and this is the major part of the story that I'm going to focus on today. We're going to end a bit early today because Maghrib is coming in earlier and earlier. So we'll end probably around 6:50 or so. So just keep that in mind, inshallah. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, وَلَمَّا وَرَدَ مَاءَ مَدْيَنَ. And when he arrived at a well of Madian. First, I want us to really appreciate here that this probably took a long time. Why? Because one thing is we have an understanding from Google Maps. You can look up where Madian is. It's across a desert from like where Giza is in Egypt. So it's a pretty far distance. Like we're talking like 100 miles, 150 miles. So that's a really long distance. This didn't happen that evening. He must have been traveling for quite a way. And next, I don't know if any of you have ever traversed the wilderness, but you don't just walk into the wilderness and there's a stick with arrows pointing on it. Of like, Madian, Aika, this is like, that doesn't exist. You are completely completely lost. He's probably educated enough to maybe navigate somehow, but this probably took a long time for it to get there. And that's also captured as in walamma. Walamma is generally used for after a long time when he finally found Madian, the waters of Madian. And how he probably got there was by accident, because Musa alayhi salam, as he's traveling in the desert, he's probably going from one water source to the next water source to the next water source, because that's what you need to survive. And he finally makes it, he happens upon a water source that finally this is the place called Madian. Maybe he interacted with some people, maybe he got there somehow, but he gets to Madian. And you can imagine a prince who's been raised in a palace has now spent maybe a couple of days, a couple of weeks, a couple of months even, in the wilderness, what situation he might be in. And so he finally, when he reaches the waters of Madian, is a way of actually translating. And finally, when he came to the waters of Madian, وَجَدَ عَلَيْهِمْ أُمَّةً مِّنَ النَّاسِ, and then came to him an ummah from amongst people. An interesting way of describing them. Came to them an ummah, a group of from people. I think it's denoted this way. This is an extremely different culture than the one he's used to. It's almost as if they are a different nation altogether. We do use ummah to describe our like entire nation of like Muslims, because like we can be described as there's certain things that hold us together. This is a group of people who were held together by something so different than Musa a.s. and the nation he comes from, that they are an ummah from mankind. One way of looking at it is Egypt was an empire, and these people are Bedouins. There are very little things that overlap an empire and a hunter-gatherer society. An empire has all of these crazy rules and rituals and government. A Bedouin people is like, let's raise our animals and travel the land. Very different ambitions, very different cultures. And all of this is supposed to be appreciated because we're about to see a marriage take place. Two ummahs get married to each other. One of the purposes of marriage, or one of the things that marriage has the ability of overcoming, is cultural differences. There's so much to be said about this. This is the only also marriage contract within the Quran. So we're about to get to those ayat soon, but that's the introduction of it. People came from a wholly another ummah. يسقون ووجد من دونهم امرأتين تذودان. And then he saw this happening. They were watering their animals. And then he saw two women holding back their animals. And he's like, this is a strange sight to see. So he sees a bunch of people come to the water, and there's a bunch of people watering their animals. So there's some water, and like these sheep or whatever they have are like rushing towards the water, and people are doing it, except these women are like holding back their animals. And Musa a.s. is very confused because like, let the animals drink. So he goes up to them. What's your problem? Is literally how is what's being translated here. And it's not a very nice, like a polite way of saying it, but it's not a rude way of saying it either. It's like, what is your situation that's causing you to not want to water, like have your waters animals? And they respond in a very interesting way as well. They both said, لا نسقي حتى يصدر الرعاء وأبونا شيخ كبير. They respond, we can't water our animals until the other shepherds are done. And our father is a great sheikh, or our father is an old man, is a stern man, however we want to translate this. Well-known man. Very weird response here from them, but it makes a lot of sense. So this is like you're saying something without saying something. Meaning that they're like, we can't go there. We can't go there until they're done. It could be that they're sharing, we went there when they were done before, and those guys, they don't know how to treat women in the workplace. The Quran talking about women in the workplace. Interesting. Yeah, but this is kind of what's being described here. Those guys, they're no good for us to interact with. And it could be that they're sharing, we used to allow our animals to go there, but we got harmed, or they harmed our animals. Like, this is not a good situation for us. And Musa a.s. doesn't go, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? We don't have anything like that. He doesn't try to solve their solution by addressing their culture. He recognizes, you guys have probably tried every solution that you can. Let me help in the capacity that I can, and that's what we're about to get next. Musa AS sees that they're having a difficult situation, and instead of saying, no, don't be afraid, you can go join them anyway, he appreciates their assessment of the situation. This is another major point of importance of how someone with intelligence and wisdom treats a situation. I've been actually the worst offender of this, probably. When someone tells me their situation, at times I want to move directly towards the solution. Like, have you tried interpreting it this way? Have you tried doing it this way? And that's not actually very helpful, because you know what someone hears when I do that? You weren't actually listening to me. You might have been listening to my practical situation, but you didn't listen to how I'm actually feeling. You're just trying to find a solution. I'm not trying to tell you the problem for you to come up with the solution. I'm telling you the problem because there's an actual problem that exists. That acknowledgement of that problem is actually very necessary. Musa AS doesn't move directly to tell them how to fix their situation. He puts himself at service. And he's about to kind of water their animals for them. So we'll get to that in a second. But I think that's the major point I want to hit on here is he listens to them completely. And we're about to have, he gets the benefit of other people listening to him, which is going to happen very soon. But he listens to their problem and he lets them finish completely. Another reason why I think like they also are able to slide in there, wa abuna shaykhun kabir, and our father is a great man. This wasn't a small conversation. They said, hey, this is why we don't do this. This is why we don't do this. That's not how we were raised. Actually, let me tell you a little bit about our father. Our father raised us in this situation. And when they say our father's an old man, that's also an explanation. You might be wondering why we're working. We're working because our father's an old man. And he can't necessarily do this. So that's why we're doing it for him. There's this idea, he listened to them completely. Musa AS first listens to them before actually moving to an actual solution. And then we'll get to the actual solution soon. But any questions, comments, reactions, reflections? Yeah.
I have a small question. I sometimes find myself doing the same thing that you mentioned. Like, if someone comes up to me and mentions their problem, I try to just solve it. I feel like that's like just a natural reaction for myself and I can't control it. Is there any tips and like or anything that I can do to stop that? Or like, yeah, I listen to the person. I actually like, try to put myself into their shoes, but I just naturally gravitate towards solving this issue so that like that's how I personally deal with my problems too. So I thought that's how people might want to deal with it too.
Yeah. I think one, and again, this is a growing edge for me. So I have to first recognize that I'm not an expert on this field, but I think one way of looking at it is people have logistical needs and people have emotional needs. And you want to be someone that is able to help with both, but not help with one at the expense of the other. That if you help someone with their logistical need, but you didn't address the scar that the logistical need caused, they might just fall into it again, right? Or if you just listen to someone, that's another kind of the other problem with this, like just made them feel heard. There's a benefit in it. Maybe that's what they needed in order to fix their own situation. That could happen, but if you provide both, that's usually the best approach to take here. So again, I like separating as like, there's an emotional need here and there's a physical need here. Which one do I have the ability or capability of fulfilling? And in what order? For me, I always like also looking at what's the order of importance here.
Sometimes I just feel like though, like when you look at from like the emotional perspective, yeah, you give logistical solution and then like you can actually do something about your problem. But when you look at from emotional, I'm just like, the max I can do is like try to understand what they're feeling and how much effect does that have on an individual, like just to feel their emotions. I just don't feel like it has an effect on anyone, where I could be 100% wrong though.
I'm curious to hear what others have to say about this, but I can tell you from my personal kind of when I've had mentors who like completely like poured my heart to them and they didn't give me a solution, but I was like, thank you so much. And like I literally felt like there's something. And if I really, really reflect back, like they just gave me more language to describe my problem. Like that was at the end of the day what they did. But that is sometimes enough because feeling heard does make a difference, because it's another way of looking at it is sometimes you pour out your mess in front of someone and then all they help you do is like organize it for you. Like, they didn't actually take it off, but you're like, you can carry it. I'm going to use a laundry analogy. Our resident laundry person isn't here, but for those of you who get that, awesome, from last semester. But you pour out like your laundry, someone helps you close, like fold it. You still need to carry it, but now your load is a lot more manageable than if it was just a tangled mess in front of you.
So like, how effective would you say, like, if somebody tells you their problem or whatever, they're like venting to you, and then you say like, how can I help you? Because like at the same time, I feel like some people do say that, but like if you're on the other end of it, like I don't know how you can help. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Very, very good question. It's very situational because it depends on what the problem is, what the person's capability is. But as long as it comes from a genuine place where there is a willingness to do something, I don't think it does a lot of harm. Though if it is coming from a quote unquote superficial place, I think that it would rather be to say that's really tough is a better thing to say than how can I help you if there's actually no will behind it. Does that make sense, Ada?
Yeah, it does.
Because there is sometimes this weirdness that we have that there's lots of people offering to help, but when push comes to shove and they don't show up, that could hurt way more. So that's where instead of providing a false sense of it, I think it might be best to say, man, that's really tough, and empathy should give empathy rather than false practical help. But on the other front, if you do have a willingness but don't know how, I don't think there's anything wrong with actually offering that help if you're willing to back it up. Really good questions. Anyone else? Then I'm going to continue through. This is the Quran talking about, sometimes we talk about the Quran doesn't have like modern examples. This is the Quran talking about two women who are in the workplace to support their family. Like, we sometimes think that all the stories in the Quran have like these very traditional values of like what a misogynistic society looks like and everything. And be like, not necessarily. We have a woman scholar, Maryam alayhi salam. We have we have women who are working outside of the household, who one of them ends up becoming the wife of Musa alayhi salam. Actually, we have the sister of Musa, a young girl who leaves home and wanders the city chasing after her brother who's floating down a river. Again, there's lots to be kind of said about like breaking what we would call our traditional roles in any given scenario. So another is also just found right here. So I want us to just appreciate, if we want to do an honest kind of look at the Quran, we find more examples of women and men breaking traditional stereotypes rather than sticking to them. And another thing I'll say is like the Quran, like, does it have a bunch of strong male role models? It does, but it also has a bunch of men crying to Allah. Like, if we really wanted the most consistent thing that men in the Quran do, it's cry to Allah. If you go through all of the stories. So I always like putting that down. It's like we should be fair in the lens that we look at the Quran through. And then Allah SWT continues. So now he takes care of their actual physical need. فَسَقَى لَهُمَا ثُمَّ تَوَلَّى إِلَى الظِّلِّ. So he watered their herd. So basically he listened to them. This is more of an English thing. He heard them and then he herded them. But anyway, that's more in English. It's not actually the actual Arabic. But he watered their animals for them. So he took care of it. And then instead of going back to them and being like, hey, how about some repayment or something? He watered them and then returned to his shade, to some shade, to kind of take care of himself, might be another way of looking at it. Like, it was probably a hard day's work to do all of this. I'm assuming it was all of their animals, not just like one. So he maybe took them one by one, whatever that looks like. And he does this so that they don't have to necessarily be in that terrible workplace that they're in. And then he goes back to maybe sitting under his tree. He's in his shade. فقال ربي إني لما أنزلت إلي من خير فقير. And he says, one of my favorite du'as in the Quran, which is, my Lord, my back is about to break, is the way that I'm going to translate it. Whatever good you're about to send my way, my back is about to break. Basically, Musa AS does a good deed. He helps someone out with their problems, and then he goes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and says, I have nothing. And he literally has nothing because he doesn't have food, doesn't have shelter, he doesn't have family, he doesn't have influence or power. He has nothing. He goes, Ya Allah, I have nothing. Whatever good you have that's for me, I'm faqir. Ana faqir. Faqir is literally like when a back is about to break. You know how we talk about the metaphorical straw that broke the camel's back? You're literally telling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like, one more thing and my back is going to break. I'm really in need right now. And he says that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers his dua literally right away in the next 2 or 3 ayat, inshallah. But again, I've quoted Princess Anna from Frozen before. This idea of like, literally, if Allah sends good in your direction, you don't say, you know what, Allah, not until you give me good. Like, gives not good in the way of like, gives you like blessings, but gives you the opportunity of doing good. Sometimes we become like, Allah hasn't answered my du'as, why should I do something good now? Not the quality that we're looking for. Musa a.s., he has nothing. None of his needs are being met right now, even though he's been asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when Allah gives him an opportunity to do an act of service, he does the act of service. And then right afterward, he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is right after you do something good is the best time to actually ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help. There's a reason right after we pray, we make dua. Why? Well, inshallah, if the prayer is accepted, maybe an additional prayer can be accepted, right? Like, I do something and then I'm in a good state to now ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for something. Ya Allah, if I did that sincerely, I hope my heart was a little bit more clean. Now I can ask you for help. And that opens so many doors for people that, like, man, none of my needs are being taken care of. Okay, go help someone else with their needs. When you do that, your needs will be taken care of. Questions, thoughts, reflections?
After I learned about this part of the ayah, about like how Musa made dua to get out of the situation that he was facing, sometimes like I feel like this is maybe like the shaitan talking to me or something like that, but I feel like every hardship that I face, I sometimes make that dua, and I'm like, am I making this dua too many times? Like, you know, Musa made this dua in his most desperate moment of his life, and I'm like, am I really that, like, you know, stuck in a corner that, like, you know, I feel guilty sometimes using that dua. I'm like, look at the man who's stuck in a desert in the middle of nowhere, and look at me, like, not even stuck in a desert. I feel guilty using this dua sometimes.
So you should only feel guilt if the one you're asking has a limited quantity of giving stuff, right? But the one you're asking doesn't have any limits. So I don't think there's any degree of guilt that needs to be felt.
I guess I'm just like comparing problems at this point. Like, my problem to a prophet's problem is like nothing, but like still, I guess it just plays. It's like something probably that I'm playing with myself pretty much.
I think it's a natural perspective to have, and I think it comes from a really deep place of like, you're like, am I being ungrateful by jumping to this dua right then, right? Because like it should be saved for the most crazy opportunities. But that's one of the beautiful things about our approach to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is for your biggest needs, but also for your tiniest needs. Like Rabbin Nas, right? Remember, Qul a'udhu bi Rabbin Nas, Malikin Nas, Ilahin Nas. A Rabb would be someone you complain. The typical person who's described when it's your Rabb is like your mother is your first quote unquote Rabb from a linguistic sense. Of course, your mother's never your like Rabb in that sense, but linguistic sense, your mother. And my mother was just over this last weekend, and there's things I will say to my mother or like talk to my mother about that I won't talk to anyone else about. Like the smallest, tiniest thing. Because like you know she can take care of you, and he'll listen to you, and she'll care about you. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. That's why even if it's like a small need, we can always go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
That makes me feel better. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any questions, comments, or reflections on the dua of Musa alayhi salam? That I'm whatever you have good sending, whatever you have good, I'm in need of it. If not, now we're going to move on to, we're going to try to do 3 more ayat in 5. No, wait, guys, that's not going to happen. Okay.
I have a quick comment.
Yes, go ahead.
I thought it was pretty interesting. When I first read this ayat, I thought about how the dua is very vague. If you generally think about it, he's not specifically saying, I want X, Y, and Z. So I thought it was interesting because like I feel like as we grow older, we tend to make more duas that are vague, saying that you know what's best for me, rather than saying, I want this specific thing, you know?
Yeah. That's a beautiful reflection, and that's very true. And you get at the essence of what a dua actually is. A dua is an admission of your state and an admission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's at the end of the day what a dua was supposed to be. Some of the most specific cases of duas in the Quran have the most generic duas. The one that comes to mind is Yunus alayhi salam, another prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is stuck in the belly of a whale, and he has the most specific ask you can think about, which is, I'm being digested alive. Can you please save me? Like, would be an appropriate dua. But his dua is, La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu min al-zalimin. There is no one but you. You are perfect and I am wrong. That's his dua. What's the ask? There's no ask. Ibrahim alayhi salam is being tossed into, he's flying up in the air, about to fall into a burning building because they built a catapult to catapult him into this giant fire that they made. You would think as he's flying in the air, Ya Allah save me, make it so I don't die when I hit the ground. So many things you could be asking for in that, or actually very specific things you could be asking in that moment. And he goes, Hasbi Allahu ni'mal wakil. How perfect is Allah, who takes care of all things. Like there's no ask. And this one is similar. What am I? Ana faqir. What are you? Anzalta ilayya min khairin. You're the one who gives good. Any good you send. So you're the provider of good. And what am I? Faqirun. Ana faqir. Like I'm someone who needs help. So yeah, I think that's a very, very good reflection there. Because I don't want to do injustice to this next portion, which deals a lot with marriage, ayah 25, 26, 27, 28, and 29. We're going to save that for next week. I hope people aren't too upset. But I don't want to try to rush this. There are a lot more lessons to be had in these next couple of ayat. And then, so next week we'll still do Surah Al-Qasas. Then the week after that, we'll jump over either to Surah Ashura or Surah Al-Taha. Does that sound good? Any other reflections, comments as we close out?
I have like one quick kind of, not, I don't know if it's a question, but like kind of comment, but to the point where you said, when you do something good is when you would ask for something. But like, what if you're just doing something good, but you don't like, it's not genuine. So like,
yeah,
I don't know, I'm trying to ask, but like if you're not genuinely doing it because you want to do it, it's just because you think you're gonna get something good back.
That's a really good question. Because it gets at the essence of like, if I'm doing good for a reward, is that me genuinely doing something that's good? And the way I have to answer that is more of, I don't think you get to control there is an element of your intentions control your actions, right? But there's also an idea that your actions will control your intentions or your thought process. Meaning a man came up to the Prophet ﷺ and said, I see other people crying when they hear Quran. I hear Quran and my eyes are dry. And the Prophet ﷺ first responds with, are there no ayat of the Quran? Is there nothing that can get you to cry? And he says, no. The next thing he says, then force yourself to cry. And your heart will follow. And it's this idea that sometimes the action does come first in order for you to really start feeling the sweetness of it in your heart, or the intention to be strengthened as a result of it. That can happen. So, and we can kind of understand this, that literally, even I've done this before, like keep your eyes open for a long time. You know, like you'll start tearing. It'll actually start even changing the way you think. You'll start thinking about things that actually do feel like things that you would cry for, because we're very neuroplastic, that the actions we do are very linked, unless it's intentionally done the other way around. There are times where you can desensitize yourself. You could put on a face or be kind of practiced hypocrisy. That can happen too. So I wouldn't go down that direction. But if you're genuinely trying, like by asking yourself, like, what would someone who's sincere do? And I'm going to do that thing because hopefully it'll make me someone who is sincere. So it's not faking it. It's doing it without passion, hoping that the passion comes next as a result of it. There'd be idea of, there are people who are truthful, mashallah. What I mean by truthful is like they are incapable of speaking anything but the truth. And then there are others who, I need to be truthful, so I will always speak the truth. When does the switch happen? I don't know, but they end up linking at some point. So I don't think it's wrong to do something good and hope that your intentions will be becoming good at some point, or that the effects of that good will be, maybe my dua will be accepted. Because at the end of the day, what do we want? We want to become more reliant on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if I'm doing good work so that my du'as are accepted, good. You know what's going to eventually happen? Your du'as will start becoming accepted because you're close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So which one came first? I don't know. But it can work both ways.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. And with that, we'll inshallah conclude. Next time we're together, we'll go over ayat 24 through 20, not 24. We'll continue 26 through 29. I know it only seems like 3 ayat, but there's a lot to be found within those 3 ayat next time. And then the time after that, we'll continue through with a different telling of the story of Musa AS in a different part of the Quran. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be amongst those that when we do wrong, that we immediately turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we are people who Allah gifts with knowledge and wisdom and to use them appropriately. When we find ourselves in what seems to be a powerless situation, we still evaluate the amount of power Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has gifted us with, and we still act in the best of manner, so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can take care of our needs from ways we would never expect. And we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ears to listen when someone else has a problem, because through their problem could be one of our solutions. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.